The kids out there watching their first presidential election should know that no presidential candidate in history has engaged in more personally insulting language and violent rhetoric than Donald Trump. No previous presidential candidate has ever made statements that left people wondering if he really wants to kill with a firing squad his political opponents, including a political opponent in his own party. But that's the way this presidential campaign is coming to an end, with the question of exactly who and how might Donald Trump want to execute if he becomes president? Who does he want to kill if he becomes president? Here's what Donald Trump said last night about former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney to former Fox buffoon Tucker Carlson, whose own text message revealed in court proceedings includes one about Donald Trump that says he's a demonic force, a destroyer. I hate him passionately. Those were Tucker Carlson's words about the person he pretends to be friends with now, Donald Trump. Let's listen to what Donald Trump had to say.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face. You know, they're all war hawks when they're sitting in Washington in a nice building saying, oh, gee, let's send 10,000 troops right into the mouth of the enemy. But she's a stupid person.
One more instructional point for the kids who are watching their first presidential election. No previous candidate has ever said she's a stupid person about one of their opponents. That's new language for presidential campaigning brought into it by Donald Trump and only Donald Trump. And obviously no previous presidential candidate has ever publicly fantasized about one of his political opponents facing 9 guns shooting at her. Here's what Vice President Harris said about that this morning in Wisconsin.
He has increased his violent rhetoric, Donald Trump has, about political opponents, and in great detail, suggested rifles should be trained on former Representative Liz Cheney. This must be disqualifying. Anyone who wants to be president of the United States who uses that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president. Representative Cheney is a true patriot who has shown extraordinary courage in putting country above party. Trump is increasingly, however, someone who considers his political opponents the enemy, is permanently out for revenge, and is increasingly unstable and unhinged. His enemies list has grown longer, his rhetoric has grown more extreme, and he is even less focused than before on the needs and the concerns and the challenges facing the American people.
Unstable and unhinged. That's as far as Vice President Harris is willing to go rhetorically. It's also factual. There is no one who can claim that Donald Trump is not unstable. Notice that she did not say stupid. That is not presidential language or language for presidential candidates. I use the word stupid to describe Donald Trump, but I'm not running for president. And stupid is a fact with Donald Trump. He has proved that time and time again. The defenders of Trump spent the day insisting that he did not mean that he wanted to see Liz Cheney executed by a firing squad. But the one person who did not deny that Donald Trump wants to see Liz Cheney executed by a firing squad is Donald Trump. Donald Trump refused to deny his political opponent's interpretation about what he said about Liz Cheney last night. He simply let the accusation stand that he wants to have Liz Cheney executed by a firing squad. And today, he added this.
If you gave Liz Cheney a gun and put her into battle facing the other side with guns pointing at her, she wouldn't have the courage or the strength or the stamina to even look the enemy in the eye. She wouldn't have. She sits back in Washington. Oh, we ought to go and attack Iran, Iraq. We're going to attack everybody. That's why I broke up with her. All she wanted to do is go to war with everybody. Because she, like Kamala, is a stupid person.
Liz Cheney responded to Donald Trump this way. This is how dictators destroy free nations. They threaten those who speak against them with death. We cannot entrust our country and our freedom to a petty, vindictive, cruel, unstable man who wants to be a tyrant. Women will not be silenced. Vote Kamala. And so Donald Trump is ending his campaign the way he began it and the way he lives every day of his life, a petty, vindictive, cruel, and unstable person. The latest Marist poll released today shows Kamala Harris at 50% of the vote in Pennsylvania to Donald Trump's 48%. And today, the Harris campaign released this ad in Pennsylvania.
This election, it's bigger than us. It's about the future. Do you want more chaos? Or like me, are you ready for some common sense? That's why I'm with Kamala. I've known her for 2 decades. She's practical, and she gets stuff done.
As president, I will chart a new way forward and find solutions to create jobs and bring down costs. I will fight for you and your family every day.
Pennsylvania, let's not go back.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.